So, with all of that out of the way, I think we can now jump into it, shall we?
Toki wa Sengoku Makki. 火の元すべてを焼いた戦火はいまだに勢い衰えず、山深いアシナの国にも燃え広がっていた。県政アシナ一心、国取りの決戦であった。
野良犬が心すらなくしたか。ああ、共に来るか、飢えた狼よ。
そして戦場で拾われた狼は修行の末熟達の忍びとなった。
忍びの掟は忘れまいな。親の次に大事なもの、お前の心に刻むがよい。あれが今日からお前の主だ。命を賭して守る。たとえ奪われるとも必ず取り戻すのだ。よいな、狼よ。
一心の国取りから24年。アシナの国は斜陽にあり、狼の忍びはすべてを失っていた。育ての義父も守るべき主も。
忍びよ、目覚めてください。あなたの主のために。
Welcome back. Now, what an introduction, wasn't it? From Software does some amazing cutscenes in all of their games, but I think this game really knocks it out of the park with the quality. I absolutely adore all the physicality of the cutscenes, the way that the characters move and the way that the scenes is blocked and directed. It's all very unique of their brand, and I just love it. Now, my PlayStation is being very loud because it's quite hot in here, and I hope I will be able to do something about it in post, but if not, I apologize. I'm still very new to this whole video making thing, so I hope you'll be patient with me as I get my bearing. Now, we are Wolf, a master ninja in a world set at the end of the Sengoku era of Japan. I will be going into a lot more details about the opening cutscene at the end, as much as there isn't really anything wrong with the translation. There are a lot of historical cues that I can get, and some differences in the way things are conveyed that are more apparent in Japan, I believe. But in general, the Sengoku era of Japan, or the Warring State period, as it's, I think, more commonly known in the West, was a period of Japanese history between the end of the 14th century and the 15th century, and the start of the 17th century, which ended in the unification of Japan by Oda Nobunaga first, and then Toyotomi Hideyoshi, and finally Tokugawa Ieyasu. Again, I will go into a lot more details than that in the end, but just be aware, this is a time period with, at the end of where the samurais are, basically. The end of the samurais, the introduction of firearms, and the last really huge war within Japan. We, as I said, are Wolf, a master ninja that has lost everything and is now cast into this place in a damp and forgotten place in the middle of winter. We have a huge scar, or maybe birthmark, on our face, something that makes our hair go grey that wasn't there in the face that we saw during the cutscene, and we woke up for the sake of our master. Now, this is the tutorial level. This is a place where a lot of games already fail in presenting their own mechanics, and I think this is a great tutorial, except for a couple of things that I will go up later, but this is a great way of introducing the player to mechanics. So we can already see that we have very little health left, and we can swim. We can explore these parts, and this already reveals new mechanics to the standard From Software era. But some things about From Software never changed. Hinting at parts that we'd be able to get to later through drops hasn't changed. Now, if I try to get up there, I just can't. I have no ways. I can try and jump around like a little fish, but that is unreachable for now. We'll be able to go there sometimes in the future. Now let's go and collect this shiny, shall we? Ornamental letter. A letter thrown into a well. Kuro's wolf, your destiny awaits you at the Moonview Tower. Escape from the well and find the tower bathed in moonlight. Even without a blade, you can reach it. Stay silent. Stay vigilant. Now, this already is a place where the Japanese translation has a lot more nuance, another point in which I will get to later, but for example, in Japanese this is not called the ornamental letter, this is called the Japanese iris letter, which is a flower, a kind of iris, which has a whole lot of significance. And this is where we learn the name of our master, of Kuro. And we also learn that we are into a well and we have no blade, so we'll have to be a little bit smarter than what would be normally required in a From Software game. Now, I have nothing against this kind of pop-up, but there's going to be a lot more intrusive ones later that I'm not a great fan of. This place looks thoroughly abandoned, just look at this. Ah. Here we are in Ashina. Ashina is a real place. Well, not really a place, but the Ashina were a real clan during the Warring States. They were destroyed before the times in which the events of this game takes place. The game chose to kind of reinterpret their history to fit their narrative purposes. But they were set deep into the mountains of Japan, and Ashina Castle, even though it's not called like that in the real world, is inspired by a real place. I will put some photos later on to show that. The reservoir in which we are in, here is, we can see where we were sleeping before, and when the mysterious woman dropped the letter and then just disappeared somewhere. As I was saying, yes, the reservoir and the moon viewing tower were all parts, they are all real architectural elements of Japanese castles that serve specific reasons. A reservoir, which has a much more complex name in Japanese, was used during sieges to have a resource, a reserve of drinking water, so they can survive sieges if the castle did not have access to a natural well or a river or anything like that. And we can see that there doesn't seem to be much water around. There was a little bit in the well there, but this well does not seem well used, it seems thoroughly abandoned. And the barricades of this castle seems to be a little run down. This is hardly a fit defense for a place, isn't it? But as we saw in the introduction, Ashina is in dire straits at the moment. Yeah, this is the a little bit too intrusive pop-ups that I'm not a great fan of. They completely interrupt the game, but they do serve the job of making sure that a player does not lose anything, and I appreciate that, but still a bit too on the nose for my tastes.
井戸底におるあの忍び、特に稼などしておりませんが、構わぬのでしょうか。
大事ない。刀もなく気力すらない。奴はもうただのふぬけよ。
Now, this is a dialogue which is basically the same in Japanese. If there are no differences between dialogues, I will not bother to point them out from now on. But, so they knew that we were there. Whatever happened to us that made us lose all hope means that we were probably captured, just thrown there, as we were probably very passive before this point. It's kind of hard to say. But they were aware that we were there, we just not considered a threat, and we probably just tossed there, awaiting for further instructions on how to deal with us. We can already see that stealth is an important part of this game. If we were to just jump off and approach them, they will just murder us. I tried. And that guy looks a bit more important than the other, doesn't he?
月見櫓が今宵も月に照らされておる。巫女様はまた月明かりで書をお読みかの。
そうじゃな。まだほんの子供というに、囚われとは気の毒なことじゃ。
ああ、源一郎様も何かお考えがあるのだろうが。
So the listening, the eavesdrop mechanic is an interesting one, a way in which we can acquire information on our objective and maybe also something more. The dialogue here in Japanese is just slightly different. The last thing that this guy says is not Genichiro, Lord Genichiro would have his reasons, but more of a, I cannot tell what Lord Genichiro is even thinking anymore. Who knows what he's thinking anymore. It depicts a more desperate situation and desperate is the right word for the condition in which all of these verses, all these guys, even though they have top knots, so they probably are samurais, but they look shabby and disheveled, really not people in a situation of peace and comfort. Now, the reason why I love this tutorial so much is that it does a great job of introducing mechanics in an organic way. We discover that we can stealth around. The way that the layout of the map is set up, we see the moon viewing tower, and we see the moon as well. Look at this view, it's just beautiful. And we know they want to get there, but there are a lot of people in the way.
月見櫓の扉はちゃんと閉まっておるか。閉まっておるが、壁の穴はそのままにしておるぞ。ああ、そちらは心配いらぬだろう。穴は崖際じゃ通えるものなどあるまいよ。
Pretty clear challenge there, but yes. Now we get into the platforming mechanics of the game, which are surprisingly good for a company that never really bothered with much platforming in the past, except for the infamous Dark Souls style platforming, which is not the best. Those games are incredible, but the platforming is not exactly their strong suit. Now again, this is a great way to introduce the single mechanics in an understandable manner. None of this is particularly complicated to do, but it is surprisingly intuitive. The game is good at understanding what you want to do and to interpret your inputs. So there is a little bit of, as you can see, an attraction force if I press the climb button. A thing that I will do probably often is to, when I'm hanging on someone, to press X instead of square to attach myself to things, but other than that, it's very intuitive. Now we see the young boy.
よく来てくれた。久しいな、狼よ。
お迎えに参上いたしました。我が主。
表を上げよ。Kusabimaru、そなたの刀だ。我が忍びよ。主従の約定に従い、命を賭し、我に仕えよ。
Gyoi。
Kusabimaru, a katana given by Kuro, the divine heir, an heirloom of the Hirata family, a cadet branch descended from Ashina. Once thought lost, it has found its way back into the hands of the wolf. The name Kusabimaru beseeches. A shinobi's role is to kill, but even a shinobi must not forget mercy. A mantra the blade itself may manifest. Now, that was a great little interactions. I love the dynamics, and I feel immediately attached to this boy who is our master. There is a lot to talk about the little interaction that I will get to at the end, but one thing that I can already tell you is that Gyoi, the last thing that Wolf says, and what we will soon discover to be basically his catchphrase, is a very dense word. The literal translation of it is something along the line of beautiful mind or beautiful soul, and it's or honorable mind, more likely. But it means something like your will be done when said as an affirmation. It is a little bit more flexible than just that, but it's a very subservient way of saying that somebody who is talking is the boss.
狼よ、傷を負っておるようだな。そうだ、そなたにこれを託そう。薬水のひょうたんだ。これで傷を癒してくれ。
Healing Gourd. A gourd filled with vitality-restoring medicine. Resting and refills the gourd. Made by an apprentice of the extraordinary doctor, Dogen. Though it is strange that the gourd's medicinal water refills automatically, the seeds within might hold the secret to how it works.
さて、そなたの体、その後大事はないか？
その後とは。
あの世のこと、覚えておらぬのか？
はい。
いや、司祭は後にしよう。今は、このアシナの城を脱さねばならぬ。
Gyoi。
堀沿いに進んだ橋の下に、場外への抜け穴がある。一心様より、そう聞いたことがある。まずは、その橋下の抜け穴を見つけてきてほしい。見つけたらそうだな。足の歯笛で合図をくれるか。ほら、昔、聞かせてくれたであろ。こう、ピーッとな。その音を頼りに、そなたのもとへ行こう。
Yes, so now we can finally equip the equivalent of Estus Flask in the equipment menu. We see that we will have a lot of stuff in the future to worry about. So we have a Healing Gourd, and we have something else. We have a Homeward Idol. A small palm-sized wooden Buddha can be used repeatedly. Held by the wolf ever since he was saved by his father, its corners are rounded with use. This Buddha is used to return home. It will return the user to the last visitor's sculptor's idol or dilapidated temple, so it's just a way to do some quick travel. And interestingly enough, it's going to be relevant, I believe, that we have a sculpture of a Buddha with us, and apparently our father gave it to us. Because we have it, and in Japanese this is, I think, a little bit more clear. We have it since we were saved by him. We didn't have it beforehand. So probably our adopted father, the big guy we saw in the initial cutscene, gave this to us. And I do not think we have anything else except for our swords. I will have more to say about the sword later on. This is our master, Kuro, the divine hair. The word they use in Japanese for divine hair is Miko, which is the same word that is used for the son of the emperor or just Jesus, the son of God in Japanese. He is a mysterious figure, and it seems to be for how important his title is and how regal he acts. He's barefooted, which is going to be, that is not just child neglect. There is a reason why he's barefooted, or at least an implied reason, I believe. But his conditions are not ideal. He seems to be well treated, there is a lot to read, but I'm afraid this is where he sleeps, which is just not ideal. And if we go upstairs, we'll see a little bit more of his condition. Yes, Wolf is just a truck and just runs over everything. A lot to read. And something hidden away. Medicinal pellets that slowly restore vitality. A secret treatment passed down for generations in these lands. Records say it has been used in battle since times long gone and lent to the famed resilience of Ashina warriors. A pill case full of these pellets would also serve as a battle charm. So a pretty straightforward healing item. So we have a Estus equivalent that recovers with each rest, and we have pellets, which are consumable, rarer in a way, and they heal slowly over time. If you use the gourd, we get a beautiful healing kanji, and we get a little bit of a vitality back. Now, the relationship between Wolf and Kuro is very clearly that of an absolute servant and a master, but as we saw, Kuro seems to be a lot more friendly than us, and wish maybe for a less subservient relationship. But we are really not much in the way of pleasantries, apparently. Anything else?
堀に沿って進んだ橋の下に、このアシナの城を見つけたら合図をくれ。アシのハブエを、そなたと私の不調としよう。
Oh yeah, the little P he made before is because in Japanese as a language there's a lot more onomatopoeias, just words that are the same as the sound they make than English or Italian, my first language. And some of them are quite silly, so that is just something that just the sound of a whistle, I guess. Now let's get into the hacking and slashing, shall we? So this is the main mechanic of this game, the thing that makes it so special and unique. It's not just hitting people, it's destroying their posture. I wonder if these were food for him, or maybe just provisions. The door was closed from the inside, so it's not like he was sealed there. He seems to be more of a revered hostage than a downright prisoner, but still. But yeah, the way the combat works, it's not the same as other hack and slash game. I don't just hack at these guys to pieces. I mean, I can. Ow. But yeah. In this game, defense is as deadly as offense. By destroying their posture, they open up to our deadly strike, so we don't need to reduce their life to 0 to win. We just need to destroy the posture until they cannot resist us anymore. Yeah, as I just said. It's very brutal. Very beautiful animations, but very brutal. We can see a little bit better now how bad the fortifications are reduced at. This seems to be a place which is constantly, constantly under siege, and who has been very damaged. We can see the Ashina symbol here for the first time, properly at least, which is not the historical Ashina symbol, but it does represent the reeds, which is what Ashina means when the clan takes its name. Now this is a little bit of an implied tutorial as well. We see they want to go there, but there are 2 people there, and there is a way of getting there, which is a little bit more sneaky and smarter than just charging straight at them. Not to say I wouldn't be able to just mow through them if we wanted to, but since we're not at our best yet, we might want to do this a little bit smarter. There are 2 people there, and another 2 people over there. So yeah, even if at our weakest we are a force to be reckoned with, these guys just have no chance. But we cannot really expect this to last, can we? This is a From Software game. I mean, I enjoy it while it lasts, but sometimes there are stronger things. Yes, counter slash. So this guy is a bit more dangerous. Ooh. Sorry about that. Yes, so bosses require more death blows, but otherwise work in the same way. Defense is the way to go to open them up. not exactly a hard boss, but we get Pellets, and therefore we learn that defeating these harder enemies, this was barely a boss, let's call it a sub-boss. Stronger enemies have these automatic drops, these extra drops. And yeah, as far as our moveset goes, this game doesn't really have much of a moveset. This is it. We have some little bit of difference, and I can do these charge strikes which go through the fence, and I have a jumping attack, but otherwise this is it. Since it's a game much more about reflexes and reactions than complex moveset, this is fine. It never feels old, really. Again, classical FromSoftware stuff and great tutorial material. We see where we want to go. We had just had a fight, and the main way is barred, and we cannot access it yet. Also, there is this thing to the side. I wonder what that is. So we advance. We take a side road. We go deeper into the castle. Ash grip into a hardened clump. Throw it at an enemy to temporarily distract them. In Ashina, the snow falls thick, and thus the hearth runs thick with ash. I don't know how to pronounce that. But yeah, this in Japanese is called an ash nigiri, which is kind of means a fistful, but is also the same name, for example, of the rice bowls. The typical Japanese rice bowls. Not exactly an important detail, but I think I should mention it nonetheless. We can see something underneath that bridge, just digging away. And we can see something that looks promising in ways of objectives.
この橋の下、堀のどん詰まりに抜け穴があるじゃろ。あそこも見張りせよとの仰せじゃと。
なんとも限界なことじゃ。戦が近いのかもしれんの。
So with this we also discover that war is not already on them. This is all damage from the previous battles, or from skirmishes maybe, but they are this badly reduced without even being in open combat quite yet, which does not bode well for them. But what is that? Well, it was aggressive. We get a nice view of his best angle, and there is going to be a lot more about these things later on, but we get introduced to the fact that humans are not, well, normal humans are not the only thing that is dangerous around these parts. Now, I don't know, I don't think I can get a good shot of this, but the design of this creature is very Japanese in a way that has nothing to do with the classical anime way of being Japanese. It has much more to do about Japanese stems and folklore. Now, we see another little shiny there, and we all want to collect the shiny, so we might as well make our way over there. Falling damage doesn't seem to be much of an issue. More pellets, which are very welcome. I got more hits than I would want to at this point, but it's fine, we got some healing left. And we see what I'm afraid probably was part of the reservoir itself, because there is water down there. We see another one of these little statues and what is probably the secret passage, but I want to explore a little bit down there first. I don't know if I can hear that quite yet, but there is something down there. Something probably aggressive. Which makes funny noises. It's a giant gecko, or gecko, which I quite like geckos. I think they're pretty adorable, but for people who don't like geckos, this must be a nightmare. There is one more over there, well hidden in the grass. And in case you thought I was just being a monster by killing it like that, they are aggressive. They're not exactly dangerous, but they are aggressive. Also, as you can see from the weird green blood, these are actually poisonous. I have no intention of getting hit. They are dangerous, dastardly little fellas. Also, they're just huge. There are going to be reasons why these guys are huge, but even without them... Again, this introduces us to an idea in which, in Ashina, there are big animals. There is a tendency of animals being, instead of just straight up fantasy monsters, of being these huge animals which basically act like monsters. Which is, again, a very folkloristic Japanese thing that is not seen in many games. We can approach and get back there from another side now. Not that there is anything to discover here, but it's good to have more options to move around and these complex maps. In which, since we are leaving a drop behind, don't think I've forgotten about that, but there is no way of getting there just yet. We will come back here in the future.
狼をよく見つけてくれた。さあ、参ろう。
御意。
血の定めから逃れることしかできぬとはな。この城を出ていずこへ参ろうか。まずはアシナの国を離れるか、あるいはどこかに身を隠すか。そなたはどう思う？
御意のままに。
御意か。そなたは変わらぬな。
は。
いや、懐かしいと思うてな。さあ、参ろう。
So, apart from the fact that this boy has some strong feet to be able to go all this way through the corpses we left behind barefooted, we can just leave him here if you want to, which is not very nice, but we can. We know that these two have known each other for very long, probably since this boy was born, or at least very, very young. The dialogue about the reed whistle being used in his childhood again, which explains why he feels clearly so warm for Wolf, which is not a great guy to feel warm towards, I feel. But yeah, the detail about the meaning of Gyoi that I mentioned before is why it was used in that way. When he asked for our opinion, we just answered again. However, whatever your will, your will be done in any circumstance. We are cold and unfeeling, and these secret passages, again, really beautiful. I always surprised how beautiful just a stone passage can be, but abandoned beyond belief, much more than all the other places. And here we see a beautiful field with an ominous figure waiting. These are the reeds that Ashina signified. These are the Ashina reeds. And those are a lot of spears and swords stuck into the ground, and piles of rock, which I will get into details later. But yeah, this is the end of the tutorial, and soon after this we will stop and just a great way to finish a tutorial, in my opinion. Let's go.
Ashina, Mikoよ。おじ上の墓前以来か。
源一郎殿。私はすまぬ。
お任せを。
邪魔立てするか、巫女の忍びを。芦名源一郎、うまい。
Now, that was a great cutscene and we'll have a lot to talk about, but right now I'm a bit busy. This guy is an incredible tutorial ender. As you see, he uses mechanics that has not been introduced to us, and this makes him so scary. Also, he's much more aggressive than anything else we've seen up until this point. Ow. It is possible to beat him, I will probably not be able to do it, and something special happens if you do. But yeah, we're really not supposed to. Well, that was pathetic. That was a wrong move.
忍びとてこの程度か。巫女はもらっていくぞ。
これは。
目覚めたようじゃな。どうやらまだ死の定めではないと見える。
Shinobi Prosthetic, the artificial arm of a shinobi passed down by the sculptor. A replica of a human arm fitted with a variety of mechanisms, apparently designed with modification in mind. While it bears a number of cuts and is still thick with blood and oil, it has been impeccably maintained. And here, in this mysterious place, surrounded by statues of Buddha, all the same and bearing a striking resemblance to the ones that we encountered in a couple of places before, in front of this mysterious figure, I think this is where we stop. I hope you enjoyed this quick trip, this introduction to the tutorial of Sekiro. If you want to know a lot more about the cultural and historical background of what we just saw, about the warring states and the little nuances in dialogues, especially poor Genichiro, which is he's a great character. I really love him, and in English he sounds much more like a smug bastard than in Japanese, where he's mostly, well, a bit desperate, I feel. Well, if you want to see all of that, then keep watching. For everyone else, this has been fun, and I hope to see you in the future. Hi, I'm glad you decided to stick around. I want to first off apologize for the audio quality. I tried to correct the background noises coming from my PlayStation, but that resulted into the audio from the game being a bit damaged. I will try and avoid that in the future and be more careful about the recording. And secondly, it was my first time recording myself while playing something, and I feel like I didn't do a great job in explaining why I liked the tutorial so much in terms of how it introduced the mechanics. So I would like to spend a little bit of time going over that in a more in-depth and thorough manner, and after that going into the history and the cultural subtext and translation and everything else. So bear with me with a little while longer. So what I find particularly interesting about the way the tutorial is set up is that beyond the overt prompts and pop-ups that explain the base mechanics of the game, there is a lot of stuff which is just implied and constructed through the level design and the UI and just the implied logic of the player as it interacts with the environment. And I think that's really cool and well done. I would have preferred more of that than the distracting pop-ups, but I understand why they went for the safe route of just having those messages being very, very evident and impossible to miss. But there is a lot of the like subtler stuff, which is especially useful for players who are used to Soulsborne games in general. So starting off, you immediately begin the game unarmed and with very little health that immediately gives you a sense of avoiding danger if possible, which is already different from any other Soulsborne game. The second thing, which is very important, is the presence of water nearby. You can immediately get into the water and learn that the water in this game is not an obstacle, it's an alternative way of moving around. You can swim, and that is immediately communicated, and exploring that rewards you with the knowledge of branching paths and the fact that you are going to come back in this path because there is a drop just out of reach. And again, there is a very Soulsborne thing to do, and it's good that they establish that immediately. It's one of the first things that you learn of the game. Then, when you get to experiment with the stealth mechanics, the way that they are introduced is that the second you turn that corner, you will be immediately in view, and then you are prompted at immediately hiding into the grass. And that gives you a hint of how sensible the discovery mechanics for the enemies, what the UI is like, and all of that. And even if the pop-ups makes it a little bit redundant, I really liked that you get to discover that in a way that gives the player pressure without it being while still being very safe, and it's very easy to hide. Then the way that the map is laid out, you have the stealth path, the stealth path that you take to get into the tower without being discovered, and you see the rest of the map immediately. And there is no hard division between these two. It's entirely a mechanical division of you are wounded and unarmed, and any single strike will kill you. So you decide to follow the instruction and use the path that will make you stay safe, and that immediately imprints into the player the idea of finding the alternative road to avoid direct confrontation if you want to, which is then reinforced later when the way that the enemies are placed rewards the little path that I took, where instead of just running towards the gate with the 4 enemies, you can go to the right and stealth around a little bit to get a couple of kills without being confronted directly. Then inside the moon viewing tower, there is the first hidden drop that immediately communicates that exploration will be rewarded by little extra stuff. And you get told implicitly by the fact that you sheath and unsheath the sword automatically when you leave Kuro's side, that you cannot attack Kuro. Again, a big difference from other Soulsborne games, where this game will avoid you attacking certain characters. There are going to be areas where you cannot commit any kind of violence, and most NPCs you will not be able to kill, even if you want to, which is also communicated through the sword itself when it says that a shinobi needs to know how to kill, but needs also to know when to be merciful. The way that the tutorial for the combat mechanics I will get to in later videos, but the way that these initial encounters are structured are a microcosm of the kind of encounters you will get from the weak enemies at first, the larger number of enemies that you need to manage later, but that you can outsmart a little bit by using the environment to your advantage, the mini-bosses, later on the non-humans and animal enemies as well. It's all a little bit of a sample of everything that is going to be in the game. The closed door that you cannot get to from this side is another clever nod to the classical Soulsborne thing of finding these kind of shortcuts in the future, and immediately tell you that this is going to happen again, that this is going to be a normal part of the game. And so is leaving that very conspicuous idol on the sides, which will be useful later. And hints immediately at something else going on. And lastly, Genichiro's boss fight, I think, is an incredible boss fight, as it is entirely made of the fundamentals you just learned, but also introduces new things in a way that makes it feel much more overwhelming for you at this point in the game, but that it still is not unfair. It's just that you feel unprepared and weakened, which reflects how Wolf, as much as he has recovered his a reason to live, really is not in his best shape. He's really out of it and cannot contend with an enemy of this level at this very moment. So yeah, all of that is implied in just how the level is constructed. I think that's really smart and worth praising. So, having done all that game design stuff, I can now move forward first in presenting the historical context in which the game's story is set, or at least the fantasy interpretation of that historical context, and then to the translation and cultural analysis of things like the dialogues and the objects and the items descriptions, and so on and so forth, that we saw in this first episode. So, The Sengoku period, or Warring State period, as I introduced during the video, was a period of Japanese history lasting from the Onin War of 1467 to the unification of Japan by Tokugawa Ieyasu in 1615, and was a period where the centralized feudal system of Japan had collapsed, and the land was therefore divided into countless clans constantly warring against each other. The Ashina historically were one of these clans, residing in the Matsu province of northern Japan, in a very mountain area of Japan in the Japanese Alps, and they were fighting against the more famous Uesugi and Date clans. This latter was the one that finally destroyed them in 1589 during the Battle of Suriagehara. There are hints later in the game that place the time frame as somewhere between 1596 and 1603, assuming that the historical facts of the rest of Japan are the same, of course. So in this fantasy version of Japan, it seems that Ashina survived much longer than the historical counterparts, maybe because the Ashina of the game is one very focused on defense and keeping the land more than expanding. Further confirmation that they are the same clan, even if, for example, as we see, the symbol is different than the historical one, is General Tamura, as introduced in the initial cutscene, as the Tamura family was a strong ally of the Date and fought alongside them against the Ashina. All of the information and more I took from a Reddit post by user Kira Taylor that I will leave in the description, and kind of sent me into this historical rabbit hole. So I think that's a good introduction to that part of the game. So now let's start with the translation and cultural explanation. In general, with all the translation have been held by a friend of mine that goes by Zhaj on the internet. I have provided a link to his Facebook in the description. He has been translating Japanese for some years now and is much, much better at the language than me. Most of the work I done myself, but for the parts that were a little bit too complicated for me, I asked for his help, so I think it's good to credit him for this. So starting from the opening cutscene, the translation in general is very faithful, and I generally really like the phrasing that they gave to the Japanese version. But there are a couple of differences, especially nuance, with the introduction of Wolf's adoptive father, that I feel more closely reflect their relationship. So, in English, the old shinobi sounds like he was intrigued by the desperate child and offers him to come with him as a result of that interest. While in Japanese, at least to me, he sounds much more colder and detached than that. He doesn't say interesting, for one, and his phrasing is less of an offer and more of a statement, like, so it seems like you want to follow me. Also, as an aside, the image of this young child gently grasping a blade like the finger of one of his parents, only for his hand to be cut from this tender attempt at a connection, is a very powerful and telling one for me. Later on, the introduction to the Shinobi codes is pretty much the same as far as the meaning goes, but feels less exposition-y in Japanese and more of an actual dialogue between these two, as the phrasing is something more like, imprint deep into your heart the most important thing in your life, second only to your parents, and then the curtain, the sliding door is opened. The one that from today will be your master, like as introducing the master to Wolf in a more organic way. So lastly, This line of the cutscene in Japanese actually doesn't mention anything about Kuro's age, and just refers to him as Aruji, which means either Master or Lord. And this sets up a slower reveal for his identity than how it goes in English. I don't think this is a big deal, as it is resolved during the first half of the tutorial, and most people already knew about the boy from the trailers. But a hypothetical Japanese person who went into the game completely blind might have had very different expectations about Kuro. Like, the opening cutscene introduces us to Wolf saving a master without any other description. Then we get the letter that just reveals that his name is Kuro. Then, during the first eavesdrop dialogue, we know that he's called the Divine Hair, and also we discover that he's just a young boy. And then we finally see him and get to know him for the first time inside the Moon Viewing Tower. And by that point, it is possible that we had a very different image of him in mind. So, moving on to our first item, the Ornamental Letter, whose name in Japanese is quite different, as it is called the Japanese Iris Letter, or the Hanoshubu. The Japanese iris as a flower has a meaning, multiple meanings. It can mean gentle heart, elegance, and good news, and is also connected to the purification of evil energies in Japanese folklore. I believe that all of these meaning actually apply to this letter, because the gentle heart and elegance are, as we will see later, little spoiler, reflects on the nature of the woman who dropped it. It is a carrier of good news for Wolf, and it has an effect of shaking him out of his reverie and dispelling kind of the negative forces, we might say, that kept him being this drag of a person up until this point. So it's all very fitting. Also, inside the description, we discover Kuro's name, which in Japanese, it's the meaning of its kanji is just ninth son. It was a very common name for the ninth son of a family. And just a minor detail, but the tone in which the actual letter is written in Japanese is much more formal and not exactly subservient, but demure, I would say, than in English. Next, as I hinted at during the video, both the Moon Viewing Tower, or Tsukimi Yagura in Japanese, and the reservoir, or Mizuno Tekuruwa, that's a mouthful, were actual features that some Japanese castle possessed. The first one, the Moon Viewing Tower, was a particularly open tower, which was usually separated from the main structure and used for observing the landscape and to celebrate the Tsukimi Festival, which are a form of summer festivals that I put more description into the video description. The second, the reservoir, as I mentioned previously, was an area present in castles that did not have access to natural wells or rivers, or did not have enough access to them, so as to provide drinkable water during sieges. And as we see in the game, that the reservoir does not seem to be exactly brimming with water, it kind of drives home once again how much under attack Ashina seems to be on a normal basis. So now we reach the second cutscene, the meeting between Wolves and Kuro. The translation here is generally pretty accurate, and I like how they give Kuros the same level of like noble language that you use just normally, both in Japanese and in English. But there is one major difference in a sentence that is not. It doesn't change the meaning of what is happening, but it gives off a different vibe to their interaction. So in this line, Wolves is not saying, "I've come to free you," but is directly answering the greeting that Kuro just gave him, the much more familiar, "Oh, it's been a while, Wolf, it's good to see you." Only he's greeting his master in the most formal and deferential way you can possibly have. Something along the line of like, "It is an honor to see you again, O master of mine." As such, Wolf doesn't come off as a brusque bodyguard as much as just a perfect servant dedicated to absolute obedience, which also fit his catchphrase, the Gyoi, which I talk about so much during the video, and that, as I said, means something along the line of "your will be done," which forces Kuro into the role of this absolute master that he's used to, but does not seem to really appreciate all that much. The description of Kusabimaru, the name being a combination of linchpin and the general Sapphic kanji given to names, is translated fairly accurately, with the only big difference being that in Japanese it specifies that Kuro is the divine heir of the dragon lineage. As I say during the video, the word for divine heir here used is Miko, which literally means honorable child, and is the title for people like the son of the emperor or Christ, the son of God. The sword is also presented as a heirloom of the Hirata family, which is a cadet branch of the Ashina. A cadet branch is a house founded by one of the sons of the main family's leader that did not inherit the title of the main family and is then sets off to have their own lands and live in subservience to the main family. So we know that Kuro had connection to this separate family. The Hirata were incidentally also a real minor family that served the Ashina during the Sengoku period, so that checks out. Lastly, I randomly found out that in an early version of the game, the Japanese description for the sword had a different quote associated with it. Instead of that about shinobi needing to kill but never forgetting the importance of mercy, it was something roughly translatable to find a connection to something important as the main reason for the blade, which makes sense with a name like Linchpin. So next up is our dear Estus equivalent, the Healing Gourd. This is a very interesting item and a lot of people have written about it, not because the translation is not accurate, the translation is perfectly fine and works really well, but it's mostly because there is a lot of cultural subtext associated with gourds and healing gourds in particular. So first off, gourds in general are associated with good luck and happiness in Japanese culture. And one of the 8 immortals of Taoism, the so-called Li Tie-Guai, I have no idea how to pronounce that, he possessed a divine gourd filled with a special medicine that could heal an injury and never run out. So probably this item is a reference to that mythological relic. Secondly, the extraordinary Dr. Dogen, mentioned in the description, is likely also a reference to a real-life figure, Dogen Zenji, the founder of the Soto School of Zen. And the name is pronounced in the same way, but it is written in a way that has slightly different meaning. The historical figure uses the kanji for journey and beginning, while Sekiro's Dogen uses those of journey and mysterious or profound, giving off a significantly more occult vibe to the character. All of this information and more was due to Reddit users Sarumaru and ZeroLXX, the latter of which also pointed out how the final line in the description was probably a pun in Japanese. For all of that, I left references and links into the description. It's a good read, so I invite if you're interested to check them out. So next, I will go quickly over a couple of minor stuff that happens in the second half of the tutorial. Most of the other translations and descriptions and stuff is all pretty accurate and doesn't need much mention. And when it comes to the little weird man under the bridge and the geckos, I decided to cover them in a later episode when they're going to be more prominent. Before we get to the real meat of this discussion, which is going to be Genichiro's boss fight in its entirety. But first, the pellets are... There isn't really anything much to talk about in the translation. There are a couple of small interesting tidbits in the kanjis and the historical equivalent to medicinal pellets, and I will leave some links to that in the description. But the only thing I wanted to mention is something that I kind of figured out by myself by translating it, and it's a neat little detail, which is in the last line, in Japanese, the more correct translation is something like, a pill case full of these pellets was a preferred alternative to a good luck charm when heading into battle, which shows kind of a pragmatic dry wit from the part of Ashina's warriors, and I think that's cute in a way. The other thing is Mr. Miniboss, the leader Shigenori Yamauchi. His name is nothing particular, like Shigenori is a pretty decent common name for a Japanese person of the time, and Yamauchi is a very common family name. The only thing that I think is a little bit interesting is that the English term leader, which is very generic, in Japanese is the more specific term kumigashira, which could mean something like it is the title of like a village elder and also a title of like a military commander. It is the boss of a small organization. So nothing extraordinary, but it does kind of point at the fact that he probably was just the officer in chief for this particular group of soldiers that we just slaughtered. So now we reach Genichiro, the final boss of this tutorial, and the character that gets set up as our main rival right off the bat of this game. Genichiro, there is a lot to talk about with him, mainly because he's the character that has been the most changed by the translation. He's very different in English than how he is in Japanese. But I will start actually by analyzing his arena a little bit, because this place is very interesting, even if we don't have really much of a chance to explore it in detail at this moment, because of a lot of subtextual reasons. Firstly, the fact that it has a lot of these little piles of stones scattered around. Leaving piles of stones scattered around is a funerary practice that is made to help the soul of the deceased to pass on safely to the other side, which follows the folkloristic belief that children who died before their parents had to construct countless piles of rock on the shores of the river Sanzu, which is very similar to the river Styx in that it is the river that carries souls to the underworld, to atone for the sin of abandoning their filial duty and dying so early. So the practice of leaving stones behind is made to help in their toil, and there are a lot of stones scattered around, together with swords and other weapons impaled into the dust, and these reeds, which are the namesake of the Ashina clan and have this ghostly, supernatural-looking white appearance, which makes this entire arena like very much looking like a liminal state between like the world of the living and the world of the dead, and also kind of construct this image of the Ashina as a people whose fate and the land whose fate is intrinsically linked to strife, mourning, and untimely death. It's a very poetic place in its own right. Now, moving on to Genichiro proper, let's leave behind the easy stuff first and talk about his name for a short while. So his name is a combination for the kanji for bowstring and first child for Ichiro, similar to how Kuro was ninth child. And this combination is going to become a little bit more relevant later when we discover his past and his story. It's nothing major, but it is a tiny detail that I quite like to speculate on. But beyond that, the really interesting part is in how his character gets across in Japanese regarding to English. He feels very different in Japanese than what the English translation leads to believe. In English, he's much more of a villain character. He's mocking and aggressive. Well, not aggressive as much as antagonistic towards us, While in Japanese, he's well, let's get into the translation, and you'll see better. Immediately, the first difference is in the first thing he says, when in Japanese, his first line is, "It's been a while, divine hair. Last we saw each other, we were standing together on your uncle's grave." Which is similar to what happens in English. The meaning is pretty much the same, but there is a tone of familiarity that in the English subtitles don't really get across, where he uses the same formulation that Kuro used with us when we met, that it's been a while. So he treats us as we are a member of his family right off the bat. Now, the second noticeable thing is Kuro's reaction to Genichiro, which even in English is pretty understandable considering his body language and everything, but I still think important to underline that in Japanese he doesn't as much thank us for fighting with Genichiro as much as he apologizes. And being Japanese, the polite language that it is, apologizing to someone to thank them is a perfectly viable way of expressing gratitude. It's something like, "Sorry for leaving the hard work to you," but the fact that the way the scene is directed leaves Kuro's face hidden, I think it implies that the apology is as directed to us as it is directed to Genichiro himself. Then there is Genichiro's final line before fighting us, which in English, as much as I like the formulation of that line in English, it is very much a villainous thing to say, to call us the noble shinobi. It feels mocking and confrontational. While in Japanese it is much more of a factual, almost resigned statement. "So you decide to stand in my way, shinobi of the divine hair." He doesn't call us noble or anything like that. He's just stating what our job is and the fact that we are in his way. And a similar kind of switch in tone there is if he defeats us. Even if the meaning is the same, he still comments on our lack of skill. While in English it sounds, again, provocative, he's provoking us. In Japanese, it is a more factual, "So, this is as far as a shinobi has to offer," kind of thing. The rivalry with him is still established, he still very much wants to beat him and feel confrontational, but he does not feel like somebody who is fighting against us because he likes to. And this is stressed even more if you manage somehow to beat him in New Game, or much more easily in New Game Plus, where this alternate cutscenes plays.
Oh, not it.忍びよ、卑怯とは言うまいな。巫女はもらっていくぞ。
So, as much as I like this line in English, and I think it conveys pretty much the same meaning, it is, in effect, quite different from the Japanese, and it feels, again, much more mocking and villainous of a thing to say. In Japanese, it is a much more simple line. It is, "Shinobi, don't think of this as cowardice," which again kind of implies that it kind of implies that since we are a ninja, we have no right to call what he has done trickery, but it's almost an apology in Japanese. It's almost he admits that what he has done is dishonorable and is not teasing us for falling for it as much as it sounds like a person that accepts that he is going to do dishonorable thing, but for an honorable purpose that we still don't really know much about. All in all, to me, Genichiro in Japanese comes off as somebody who is more desperate than villainous. Someone who believes in his own ideals so much as to be determined to be violent and unfair, even towards people that he holds no animosity for or that he considers members of his family, if it is for the greater good. And this image is reinforced by the fact that he seems to be someone that Kuro respects and that he feels that he is betraying in his attempt at escape. A justified betrayal, but a betrayal nonetheless. Finally, I will conclude with something that is not as climactic as Genichiro, but is still important, and that is going over a little bit of the Shinobi Prosthetic. The description is fairly accurate, and it reveals to us that the name of our mysterious savior is the sculpture, but in Japanese his name is more specifically that of Bushi, which were artists that specialize in sculpting and carving depiction of Buddha. So he's more specifically the sculptor of Buddhas, which is no surprise to anyone, really. Also, the Japanese term used for mechanism in this case is karakuri, which describes the kind of mechanism used in marionettes and automatons and other kinds of simulated humans and stuff like that, with gears and pulleys and strings and cords and so on, which is perfectly intuitable by just looking at the thing, but it's still a detail that I find neat, and I like the word karakuri, so I wanted to share that. And that's the end, I think, for this episode. Thank you for having listened until the end. This was a very long video, but I learned a lot while doing it, and I hope you have learned too by listening to me go over interesting fact and translations about Sekiro. The next episodes are going to be definitely shorter, going to be focusing on shorter sections of the game, but I still hope that you got something out of it, and that I'll see you in the future.